Just a note real quick. A thunderstorm hit while I was filming and it ruined both the sound and lighting of this video, but please don't click away from it. I put a lot of effort into it and it's really good and you'll hurt my feelings if you judge about the superficial and then I'll be really sad and that'll be on your shoulders. Please bear with me. Okay, thanks. Bye! Hi. A while back, I created a video on elemental magic systems, and if I may say so myself, it was pretty well received. A user named Connor Scott commented on that video asking me for tips and advice on creating nations or societies. I consider myself fairly good at world building, and so I decided to oblige to that request. But then I went down the rabbit hole of world building, and so I've decided to create a series of videos about it. So, Connor Scott, if you are watching this, I promise that sometime soon I will create a video specifically on designing nations and societies, but with this one, we have to go all the way to the beginning of world building, so please do bear with me, and thanks for the suggestion. Before I jump into the content, I have to give you a disclaimer. I am not an expert on world building or writing, nor am I claiming to be. This video is the result of painstaking research, and see it as me sharing what I've learned with you and nothing more. Oh, one other thing. I'm going to focus primarily on fantasy in this video, but everything that I'm about to say applies to science fiction and maybe other genres as well. Just keep that in mind. So with all of that said, because there is a lot of ground to cover here, let's just jump right in. So, what is world building? Dictionary.com, which was literally just the first result when I searched for this, defines world building as the process of developing a detailed and plausible fictional world for a novel or story, but of course it's not limited to just books. It applies to movies and video games and graphic novels and literally any type of story. Almost everyone who writes fantasy or science fiction has dabbled in world building, largely because it's considered a prerequisite to those genres. When done well, world building creates believability, which by consequence creates immersion. And really, most people assume that that's both the long and short of it. You create a sensible place or world or system, make it work, and call it a day. Right? No, and it makes me wish that there was alcohol in this. There isn't. But I wish there was. Well, just pretend there's alcohol in it. World building is broken down into three key things: geography, science or physics, and culture. That sounds simple enough. Right? I wish. Oh, I wish. See, each of these things can be broken down further and further and further and can be taken ridiculously far depending on how much time you have and how sane you are. So, let's start with geography. One mistake that a lot of new writers, and maybe even old writers too, make is that they oversimplify their fictional worlds without even realizing it. I am highly guilty of this. In fact, I'll use one of my own ideas as an example. This particular story is called Worldbuilder, and I touch on it briefly in my previous video, so if you want to learn more about it, of course I will link it above and below. I can show you. Wait, bear with me. See, I don't know if you can see that, but it says Worldbuilder, and this... Wow, this is worse than I remember it being. This is my world map of my fictional world called Gamjonwar. Wow, this is terrible. When I created this here world, I did so on purely a surface level. I created some random places with some random names and left it at that. To this day, I can't tell you if these are countries or cities or continents. I have no idea. What I have created here would be the equivalent of taking a world map of our Earth, labeling just the continents, maybe the oceans too, and claiming that it is a detailed and accurate depiction of our world. I can tell you that I live in Africa, and maybe you have an idea of what Africa is like or where it is, but what does me telling you that I live in Africa actually tell you about where I live? Nothing, really, because I do live in Africa, but I live in South Africa, a country that is distinct from all of the other African countries. Then, if you take South Africa, I live in a province, one of 9 by the way, called Gauteng. Within that province, Gauteng, I live in a city called Pretoria, which isn't actually called Pretoria anymore and hasn't been for many, many years, just that nobody here cares or calls it by its official name, which is Tshwane. And then, considering Pretoria, I apparently live in the southeast of the city, in a suburb called Makelneuk, which got its name from an ancient or old Scottish word describing some sort of curve. That last part implies that there is a history of Scottish people in this town, Scottish people who had enough influence to name it. And that implies that there's a history between South Africa and Scotland. And that in and of itself raises the question, in a world-building sense, where and what is Scotland? See, South Africa and Scotland are vastly different from each other, but they're still 2 countries in the same world. A map of just the continents wouldn't tell you that. So when it comes to geography, not only can you break it down in the sense of you have continents and you have countries and you have provinces or states or regions and you have cities and you have towns and suburbs and other such things, you can also break down your geography world building to landscapes, architecture, climate, weather, the seasons, the locations within the locations, the flora and the fauna, population density and diversity and development, time zones, and so on and so forth. You literally can take it as far as you want to take it. Once you've broken it down into those things, you can break those things down even further. Let's use weather as an example. Pretoria gets ridiculously fucking hot. It is 35 degrees today. I can feel the humidity in the air. I'm suffering so much. I hate it. Why did I move here? But we just had a week full of crazy rain and thunderstorms, and in that week it wasn't as hot as Pretoria has a reputation for being. In fact, I think there's some thunder rolling overhead right now. Pretoria's weather is usually 1 or 2 degrees greater than Johannesburg's on either end, even though Pretoria and Johannesburg are basically one and the same. They're like, if you had to look at a map, they'd be right next to each other, but their climates are, or their weather is slightly different. Then you can compare Pretoria to a city like Cape Town, which is a coastal city. There, they get their rains in winter, we get ours in summer. In Cape Town, they also get the occasional snow, and they get ridiculously strong winds. But even though Pretoria and Cape Town have vastly different climates, and therefore you can expect extremely different weather from the 2 of them, they're still part of the same country. It doesn't really begin or end with this. Now, I'm not going to go into as much detail about the science or physics and the culture of world building, because then this video would literally come out an hour long. But suffice to say, the rabbit hole runs just as deep, if not deeper. The science of your world will determine how similar it is to ours. What's the physics like there? Here on Earth, there's a reason why we can see the moon at night, or why we only ever see one side of it. What would the reason be that the world you've set your story on has 3 suns, and how would that affect the people who live on that planet? What would the implications of traveling at light speeds or teleporting be? Is there magic in your world, and if so, how does it work? Is it considered a science there? Does it use laws of physics that we have here in our world? By the way, magic systems are an entirely different thing. I'm more than happy to research it though, so if you would like a video or a video series on magic systems, do let me know. I will reference the elemental magic one that I mentioned earlier if you would like to see that one, by the way. Also, sorry about the deteriorating light. There is actually a storm coming over now, just my luck. And then we get to culture, which is probably what people think of the most when they think about world building. Culture could be something as simple as the trope that elves are highly skilled archers, or it could be something as complex as the differences between South Africa and Scotland. Culture is defined by a wide variety of things, including, but probably not limited to, religion and spirituality, appearance, ethnicity, history, language and communications, food, entertainment, social structure, politics and law, resources and access to information or education, and, surprise, surprise, geography. So ultimately, this isn't world building. This is a badly drawn map of a world that I created but never developed, and I think that that is what most new writers do and think they're world building because they have something to show for it, even though it's literally just the tip of the iceberg. Or is it, though? Onto the different types of world building. Much as I just rambled on about what actually makes world building, what I just described, considering every teeny tiny and very last detail of your world, is called hard world building. It's the sort of world building where absolutely everything in your world is decided. For example, the different languages that different races or cultures or species speak, or how they brush their teeth, or what their clothing is made out of, or how they celebrate birthdays, or what time of day they eat, and their religious observances, and absolutely everything that you could possibly think of. By far the most popular example of a hard world builder would be J.R.R. Tolkien, with The Lord of the Rings, or at least that world, largely being recognized as the gold standard of hard world building. But then you get soft world building, where simply put, your world is the way it is with very little explanation. I can use His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman as an example of this. This series starts off in a parallel world that is quite similar to ours, but the main distinction is that the humans there have external souls called demons. These demons take the form of animals, and the humans can communicate with them. There is a system regarding the demons. For example, they can shapeshift at will into any animal form they desire until their human hits puberty and they settle into a fixed form. It's taboo to touch the demons of other people, and it is sheer agony to stray too far from your demon, and being separated from it entirely will likely result in your death, much the same way that if your soul separates from your body in this world, it's probably because you did. But quite simply, that world functions the way it does because it's not our world. We don't need to know why or how humans evolved to have external souls. Or, in the second book in the series, we don't need to know who every single owner of the subtle knife was. We don't need a 1,000-page manual on how the alethiometer works. All that matters is that it does. His Dark Materials leaves so much to the imagination of the reader, and so it becomes up to the reader to fill in those blanks if they feel like it. If you don't feel like it, it won't detract from the story in any way, because most of the world building is surface-level world building. Though it's not as popular as The Lord of the Rings, nobody can say that His Dark Materials is less immersive. It is one of the most immersive stories that I have ever read. Or we can use Harry Potter as an example of soft world building. No one can dispute the immersion of the Harry Potter world. Whether you like the story or not, it is so blatantly, obviously, one of the most immersive stories of our time, or in all of history, if you will. I just turned my light on. That makes a world of difference. World of difference. The original charm of Harry Potter existed because of how little was actually explained. This is because the world of Harry Potter was told to us on a need-to-know basis. For example, the barrier of platform 9 3/4 was just there. We needed to know that it was there and how it functioned, but we didn't need to know who put it there or how long it had been there or if there are others exactly like it. Because that information didn't matter. Now again, hard world building and soft world building are equally immersive. One is not superior to the other, and it will largely depend on the story you are trying to tell. That said, there are some considerations. Hard world building, while spectacular and sensible and meticulous, can be tedious for both the writer and the reader. While it tends to decrease the likelihood or opportunity for plot holes, because everything within that world will have its exact place and explanation and description, it leaves almost nothing to the imagination, and therefore can mean, maybe in some instances, that readers won't become as invested into your story because there's nothing left to explore. Again, this isn't always true. I mean, look at The Lord of the Rings or Middle-earth and how many stories evolved from that. For example, in Dungeons and Dragons, people are still actively immersed in that world to this day. So it's not to generalize all of them. I'm just saying that that is a possibility. But the most important consideration of hard world building is that it can literally get in its own way. The more focused you are on everything having its place and working in a streamlined way where nothing can be broken down or questioned or challenged, the more you are limiting your story and your creativity within that world. Soft world building, on the other hand, leaves a lot to the imagination. So it gets to the point faster, and I suppose it's easier to implement into your storytelling. But it opens up many, many doors for plot holes. Look at Harry Potter, and it can result in straight up lazy, nonsensical, and heavily flawed storytelling. Again, look at Harry Potter. I do have to add a caveat here. Just to generalize, that's what sets them apart. It's not to say that it will apply to your story, it's just some things that you should probably think about. Also, it's raining, so if I start shouting at you, I'm sorry. However, there are exceptions to hard world building and soft world building, and in fact world building as a whole, and that would be absurd fiction because it doesn't follow any logical rules, and magical realism because the main reason for these magical elements existing in those worlds is because they're not explained, they don't have to be explained. That's kind of the point of magical realism, so you wouldn't have to world build to make your world make sense in a magical realism setting. Then there are two other types of world building, and honestly at this point I was too lazy to dig like really deeply into this world building, so again, forgive me if I'm wrong, you might want to take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt or look it up on your own. But there's also bottom to top world building and backwards world building. The names of these things may vary, they may be called something else. I'm just calling them these two because they're the simplest. So bottom to top world building, as I understand it, would be that you create everything in your world before you come up with a story that will take place in it. Whereas backwards world building will be that you write your story first and world build as needed, as you see fit, or where it's necessary, which is what I did with my story, The Fifth Warrior and the Disincarnate series. I came up with the plot first, I came up with the characters first, and the actual world that the story takes place in came afterwards. So I would explain it or describe it as bottom to top world building being what a plotter is, and backwards world building kind of being what a pantser is, where you just wing it or discover it as you go. But then there's a third thing that I have to mention, and that's when writers try to combine hard world building and soft world building, because it just doesn't work, okay? I will fight you on this. It's not to say that you can't plan your world and develop it as you go. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is that if you're going to hard world build, then just fucking hard world build. If you're going to soft world build, then just fucking soft world build. Don't soft world build first and tell your story using soft world building, and then after the fact try to hard world build like J.K. Rowling or the creators of Avatar: The Last Airbender, or what I'm talking about here, which is still the reason for most of my anger in this life, that piece of shit Legend of Korra. All you are going to do, if you start off soft world building and then hard world build, when all is said and done, like, oh, by the way, all you're going to do is piss off your readers or your audience and undo your own story. Now, don't get me wrong, who doesn't love learning new facts about a story that they have been completely immersed in? Who doesn't love a good backstory? These little tidbits that we get after the fact are often really, really cool and appreciated. There is absolutely nothing wrong with elaboration, whether it's to tie up loose ends or literally just to entertain. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you tell one story, like the story of Harry Potter and Voldemort, and then years later decide to tell a different story about how wizards would just take a shit wherever and then magic their poo away because they didn't have plumbing, you are going to rip holes in your own world. Because in doing so, you're taking a world that used to be fully immersive and cut and dried And you're going to cause people to question it and tear it apart, and therefore the entire world itself is likely going to collapse. Using that example, which by the way, I am not lying about, okay? Okay, J.K. Rowling actually said that. But using that example, it will make you wonder why, if the wizards got plumbing from the Muggles, why didn't they get electricity from the Muggles? It will also make you wonder where the shit actually goes once they magic it away. But also, if witches and wizards are only allowed to wield magic when they come of age, which in the Harry Potter world, or at least in the UK in the Harry Potter world, is 17 years old, what would wizards do before they had plumbing? Would you have like 16-year-old wizards and witches just relying on adults to come and literally magic their shit away because they couldn't do it themselves? Or did that law that you were only allowed to wield magic until you're 17 come into effect after they stole the idea of plumbing from the Muggles? But if that is the truth, then what was the world like before that law was implemented? Were little kids running around wielding magic all willy-nilly? Do you see what I mean? You will rip holes in your own universe. Or you'll end up in a situation like with Legend of Korra that literally just undid everything that Avatar The Last Airbender set in place, and that is unforgivable. So now that we have established that there is such a thing as over-explaining or unnecessary elaboration, we get to the final part of this video, in which I will try to answer two very important questions. Number 1, does world building improve your storytelling? The answer is a resounding no. You can world build as much as you like and still tell a garbage story. World building, unfortunately, won't improve jack shit unless you know how to write. Much like how if you had to sit me down in front of a drum kit right now, I would definitely be able to make noise, but it wouldn't be very good music, because I don't know how to play the drums. World building is just one facet to storytelling. It is not the be-all and end-all of it, particularly in fantasy and science fiction where so much emphasis is placed on it. Knowing how to world build will certainly improve the immersion of your story, but it won't improve the story itself. It won't make you a better writer, and it won't make your story more interesting. At least, not by default, or not inherently. At the end of the day, world building is a foundation. It's reference. Think of it as the ink that you write your story with, not the words themselves. A boring, badly written tale with intricate backstory will still be a boring, badly written tale, because you will still need a good plot and interesting character development and some semblance of writing talent or skill to make your world building mean a damn thing to your readers. And so we get to the final and I suppose most important question in this video. Is world building necessary? And the answer to that one is yes. Kind of. Sort of. Because you can't tell a story without it. A fantasy or science fiction story without world building won't be immersive, because there will be nothing to immerse into. But this doesn't mean that you have to dedicate all of your time or energy or thought to world building. If you are not a world builder, then don't really world build. Most writers world build without even realizing that they are world building. Because most of the time, unless you are actually J.R.R. Tolkien, your world building will be decided by what's implied in your story. As one example of this, if you are writing a space opera, whether you have put any time or effort or energy or thought into your world building or not, you are implying that humans have fled this planet, or at least have the ability to do so. You're implying that our technology has advanced to that degree. You're implying that space travel is probably ordinary and nothing special on this planet anymore. It's the elements of your story that are implying the world that you have built or created. If you don't world build, at least a little bit, even if it's subconscious, nothing in your story will have any reason for occurring. Rules won't apply or won't have to be enforced, and logic in your story will likely break down and it will become an absurd story, whether you like it or not. You'll also probably rely on cliches and tropes that don't make sense within your world, which is a sign of terrible writing, and most importantly, you'll probably come to rely on the idea of a deus ex machina to resolve your story, because nothing has to make sense or lead into anything else. Simply put, it is extremely difficult. Like, you actively have to try to do this, and will probably still fail, to tell a cohesive story without world building. Again, even if it's subconscious or basic or surface level world building, just by writing your story, you are building your world. Knowing this, it would of course serve you well to put a little bit of thought into your world building, at least to refine it rather than just wing it. But of course, that is up to you. You absolutely don't have to, just it will probably serve your story if you do. You don't have to write an entire encyclopedia's worth of planning and information to get your world building to fit into your story, but like I said, you might want to give it just a little bit of time and consideration to make sure that your world building won't drag your story down. You want to be consciously aware of it, is what I'm trying to say. In the comments, let me know what type of world builder you are, if you consider yourself one at all, and also let me know which topics you would like me to cover in future videos. I will hopefully have another world building video for you next week Sunday, so I think that's all. I'm going to go now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, see you next time. Bye!